crumbling sentinels, their faces hollow and their hearts forgotten by time. The dark places of the world seemed to stretch endlessly, like a wound left to fester. Within these depths, Moria's dark halls and Utumno's echoing voids bred terrors so ancient they defied imagination. Whispers filled the air, curling like smoke around those who dared to listen. The voices were not of flesh and bone, but of memories long buried. Tales of forgotten evils, older than the stars themselves, rose from the black stone. These were not mere shadows. They were the very essence of destruction, born in the days when Morgoth walked the earth as a god of fire and malice. One name reverberated through these hollowed realms, carried on the echoes of time. Gothmog the Balrog, Morgoth's high captain. His name, once feared across all the lands of Middle-earth, was thought to have been extinguished in the flames of Gondolin's fall. The city, its white towers now crumbled into dust, had seen its last stand. Yet the stories whispered that his malice had never truly died. For in the deepest recesses of these forgotten caves, where even the light of the stars could not touch, something stirred. It was said that Gothmog, though felled in the final battle, had prepared for his death in a way only a creature of his kind could. His spirit, bound by dark rituals, had woven itself into the very bones of the earth, awaiting a time when the world would falter and his power might rise again. And now, as the land trembled and strange fires burned in hidden places, it seemed the shadow of the Balrog was not finished, not yet. The last stand of Gondolin, once believed to be the final chapter, might have only been the beginning of something far worse. Gandalf, the wise wizard, stood on the edges of the old world, looking over the land with a heaviness in his heart. He had heard the whispers, felt the tremors, and feared the consequences of what was yet to come. His mind wandered back to the last days of Gondolin, where the fierce beauty of the city was shattered by the arrival of the Balrog. The memory of that final battle, the fires that consumed Ecthelion, and the cry of Gothmog still haunted him. The echoes of that conflict were not done. You may think the shadows are gone. Gandalf's voice echoed in the silence, his words a grave warning. But the darkness of Middle-earth lingers in places where no one dares to tread. And so the story begins. A group of brave souls, elves and rangers alike, set forth, driven by curiosity, duty, and a burning need to understand what lay beneath. They were scholars, explorers, and warriors, each of them haunted in their own way by the call of the unknown. They had heard of strange fires in the forgotten tunnels, the flickering light of something ancient and powerful, something that could be traced back to the heart of Gondolin itself. But none could prepare for the horrors that lay ahead. The first clue came in the form of a half-burned scroll, its edges singed, but its words still legible. The scroll spoke of Gothmog's secret retreat, hidden beneath the ruins of even in death, his malice would not fade. As they descended deeper into the mountain's belly, strange sights awaited them. Skeletons, their bones fused with the black stone, littered the dark passages. The walls seemed to pulse with an ancient power, glowing faintly with symbols that no one recognized. An elven blade, blackened by a heat that still smoldered after centuries, lay half buried in the dust. There was no mistaking it. Something was awakening, something that had slumbered for far too long. The group moved cautiously, their steps muffled by the silence that pressed in on all sides. They exchanged anxious glances, their faces pale from the dread they could not explain. Some were driven by duty, determined to uncover the truth, to stop whatever evil had been set in motion. Others were haunted by the fear that this was a mistake, that they were about to open a door that should never have been touched. "I feel it," one of the rangers muttered, his hand clutching the hilt of his sword. "It's not just the land that trembles. It's the air, too. It's heavier." The scholar who led the expedition nodded gravely. "It is as if the earth itself remembers." And then they found it. A massive chamber, carved into the rock as if by some ancient, malevolent force. At its center stood an altar, cracked and scorched, its stone slick with the remnants of ancient fires. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur, a scent that made their eyes water and their breath catch. It was then that they saw the runes etched into the stone, the sigils of Morgoth, his black power still seeping through the cracks of time. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The ground trembled once again, but this time it was no mere earthquake. This was something else, something older, something that had been waiting. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, revealing the darkness below. And with it, a heat rose, a palpable, burning force. "I told you," Gandalf had said before they set out, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Some truths are better left undiscovered." The tremors began subtly at first. The earth beneath their feet rumbled softly, like the growl of a long-forgotten beast awakening. But soon the shakes intensified, rattling stone and bone alike, as if the very foundation of Middle-earth was being stirred from its ancient slumber. At night, a thick haze of sulfur and ash began seeping through the cracks in the ground, lingering in the air like a ghost from the past. It was a smell that unsettled the soul, the scent of ancient fires rekindled, an omen of something terrible stirring below. Gandalf sat by the fire, his brow furrowed in thought. The tremors had become frequent, and the ash carried an unfamiliar weight, like a curse returning to haunt them. His fingers traced the edge of an ancient map, a map of places long forgotten, where evil had once festered and now threatened to rise again. One by one, the others gathered around, exchanging looks of unease. The dwarven scholars had uncovered something disturbing, old runes, half obscured by time, but legible enough to convey Something dark, something more terrifying than even the Balrogs, had been left behind, and it was waking. "I've seen it in my dreams," said one of the rangers, a young elf with sharp eyes, though his voice trembled as he spoke. "Flames, a fire so hot it burns the very fabric of the earth. I see the towers of Gondolin falling, and I hear his laughter, distant yet near." Gothmog's laughter. Gandalf met the elf's gaze, his face etched with worry. "The Balrog's curse is not easily undone. You may be seeing more than just nightmares, my friend. The Balrog's spirit, bound to the earth by Morgoth, is not as easily extinguished as we would wish." The fire crackled and spat, casting fleeting shadows on the walls of the cavern. In the flickering light, Gandalf's eyes grew distant, his mind traveling back to the days of Gondolin's fall. The memory was clear in his mind, though the pain of that time never truly left him. "I was there," Gandalf continued, his voice low and heavy with the weight of history. "I saw the last stand of Gondolin. I saw the fall of the city, the elves fleeing in terror, the flames rising higher than the stars themselves. And I saw Gothmog. He was there, in the heart of the battle, his body aflame with fury, his whip cracking the very air around him." The party fell silent, the weight of Gandalf's words sinking into the cold, stale air. The fire continued to burn, but the warmth it offered was fleeting. Something darker, more sinister, was at work. They had uncovered something in the ancient dwarven records, something that none of them had wanted to find. Gothmog, the Balrog of Morgoth, had bound his spirit to the very bones of the earth before his death. His malice had not been erased. It had only been sealed, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The party exchanged uneasy glances. They had come here to learn, to uncover the truth of Middle-earth's past. But now they were facing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. "We cannot ignore what we've uncovered," said one of the elves, her voice tight with resolve. "The darkness beneath Gondolin, beneath these mountains, it's alive. We cannot let it fester. We must go deeper." Gandalf nodded gravely. "We cannot afford to wait any longer. If Gothmog's spirit is indeed rising, it will not stop. The land itself will tremble with his fury." The party gathered their equipment, preparing for what lay ahead. The weight of the decision hung heavy on them. Each step into the unknown filled with the growing dread of what they might uncover. Their blades, once forged to defend against the likes of Morgoth's armies, were now their only defense against an evil far older and more insidious. They set out, following the ancient map into the dark corridors beneath the earth. As they ventured deeper into the tunnels, the signs grew more frequent, more alarming. Birds flew erratically into cliffs, their bodies falling to the ground, lifeless. Rivers, once flowing with the lifeblood of the land, began to dry up overnight, their waters vanishing as if consumed by some unseen force. The stars above seemed to blink out, one by one, as though the heavens themselves were turning their gaze away from the horrors unfolding below. But still, they pressed on, driven by the need to uncover the truth, to stop the darkness before it could spread. In the silence of the tunnels, the weight of the air pressed down on them. The very walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat of their own, as though the mountain itself was alive, breathing in the darkness that lay hidden within. As they neared the heart of Gondolin's ruins, the ground shook with greater intensity. The faintest whisper of heat seemed to rise from the stone, like a smoldering fire that had been long extinguished, but never forgotten. And then they found it. The chamber was vast, its walls jagged and molten, as though the earth itself had been scorched by some ancient fire. Faint, glowing runes lined the walls, pulsating with a malevolent energy. At the center of the chamber lay a throne of obsidian, its surface still warm to the touch. Chains, long rusted by time, stretched from the throne, disappearing into the black pits of the earth, as if they were tethering something to the stone, something that had been waiting. Gandalf stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the runes that adorned the walls. These are the sigils of Morgoth. He pledged that Gothmog's spirit would never be extinguished. Even if slain, he would return through shadow and flame. As Gandalf spoke, the very air around them seemed to crackle with energy. The flames from the past, the fires of Gondolin's fall, had not been extinguished. They had merely been waiting for the right moment to resurface. Without warning, shadows coalesced around them, twisting into tendrils of flame that lashed out like whips, crackling with the fury of the Balrog. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of burning sulfur, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble violently. The laughter of Gothmog echoed through the chamber, deep and guttural, as though the very mountains themselves were laughing at their folly. The party scrambled, their blades drawn, but it was too late. The darkness had risen, and with it, the fury of the Balrog. Panic set in as the group tried to retreat, but the very walls of the chamber seemed to close in on them, the air growing hotter with each passing moment. One of the rangers, overwhelmed by the heat and terror, stumbled backward, inadvertently triggering a series of magical tremors that cracked open a hidden vault in the floor. From within, an overpowering wave of heat and malice erupted, flooding the chamber with a blinding light. The group was thrown back, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. The darkness was no longer a mere presence. It was alive. It was here. Gandalf's voice was drowned out by the roar of flame and fury. "We are too late," he muttered, his words lost in the chaos. The very earth was crying out in agony, and they were powerless to stop it. The true horror of their discovery had been revealed, and the darkness they had hoped to contain was now free, rising from the depths of Middle-earth, fueled by the hatred of an ancient power that would never die. The shadows in the chamber thickened, coiling and swirling with a life of their own. The air grew heavy, saturated with an oppressive heat, and the very stone beneath their feet seemed to hum with a deep, foreboding resonance. From the shifting darkness, a form began to emerge, monstrous, coalescing slowly but surely, as if the very shadows themselves were being sculpted into shape. Flames licked the edges of the silhouette, casting a dim, fiery glow over the chamber. The figure took form half solid, half shadow, but undeniably real. The air crackled with energy, and a low, guttural growl reverberated through the walls, as though the earth itself was mourning the return of an ancient evil. Gothmog the Balrog, his once mighty frame, now twisted by dark sorcery and bound to the stone itself, loomed before them. His fiery eyes glowed, piercing through the thick smoke that shrouded him. His wings unfurled, not with the majesty of an ancient creature, but with the terrible finality of a force that had long been sealed away, now freed by their intrusion. Foolish mortals, a voice rumbled from the depths of the dark shape, a voice deep and cruel, drenched in the remnants of Morgoth's malice. You have undone what should have remained buried. The party stood frozen, paralyzed by the raw power of the creature before them. The truth hit them like a blow. Gothmog had not merely died in Gondolin's fall. Through foul sorcery, he had bound his very essence to the stones of the earth, a dark pact made to ensure that, should any foolish enough to disturb his tomb come, he would rise again, reborn through shadow and flame. We thought we could bury this evil, trap it in time, one of the elves whispered, his voice shaking with dread. But it was never meant to stay dead. The ground beneath them trembled once more, and the air grew thick with a suffocating heat. The walls began to shift, bending and contorting in ways that defied logic. The very structure of the mountain seemed to come alive, reshaping itself under Gothmog's growing power. The tunnels were no longer just tunnels. They were his domain, twisting and collapsing around them. Panic set in. The group turned to flee, but the way out had already been consumed by darkness, the passage closing behind them like a hungry mouth. The very air was thick with dread, and each step they took seemed to lead them deeper into the maw of madness. "Run," cried one of the rangers, his voice cracking with terror, but his legs betrayed him, and he stumbled, falling to the ground. They had come to face a creature of unimaginable malice. But now they were not only fighting for their lives, but for their sanity. In the frantic scramble to escape, hidden fears and guilt began to surface. The scholar, who had always been the most determined, paused, a tear slipping down his face. I was the one who insisted we go deeper. I should have known. His voice trembled, not just with fear, but with the weight of his own doubts. The elf beside him, once so full of resolve, now looked at the darkness with horror. "I've always feared this moment. I've always known it would come, but I never thought it would be me who would stand here, facing this. For a moment, the chamber grew still, save for the rapid breathing of the group. The heat continued to rise, and the flames of Gothmog's presence licked at their edges. Desperation settled in. They had no way out. The walls closed in, and Gothmog's presence grew stronger, feeding off their fear. The shadow of the Balrog reached out, its tendrils curling toward them, like a serpent waiting to strike. But then, in a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, one of the rangers, a woman with eyes that had seen too many battles, stepped forward. She could see no other way, no escape. Her heart beat fiercely in her chest, and for the first time, she understood the true nature of sacrifice. With a determined breath, she drew her blade. "I will collapse the chamber," she whispered to Gandalf, her eyes meeting his. "It is the only way to stop this evil." Before anyone could stop her, she moved toward the heart of the chamber, toward the very place where the darkness coiled most tightly. She slammed her blade into the stone with a force that shook the walls. The mountain groaned as cracks began to spread like spiderwebs, and the chamber trembled with the power of her action. Gothmog's roar shook the very foundations of the world as the walls started to collapse. A final, terrifying moment of clarity descended, and the group could only watch as the Balrog's form shrieked in fury, the flames licking at the falling rocks. The last thing they saw was the woman's face filled with sorrow, but also resolve as the chamber crumbled. The explosion of heat and malice knocked them all off their feet, and the world seemed to shudder into oblivion. Was it over? Was Gothmog truly destroyed? Or had they only delayed the inevitable? The air stilled, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. The echoes of the Balrog's fury faded into the distance, leaving the group in the cold, oppressive silence of the broken mountain. The survivors crawled from the wreckage, their faces scorched, their eyes hollow. The landscape above them had changed. The skies were darker, quieter, as if the very world had drawn its breath in anticipation of something yet to come. Gandalf, bloodied and battered, looked up at the darkened sky. The stars were now faintly visible, but cold, indifferent. They blinked back into existence, as though they had never witnessed the horrors below. "The fires of Morgoth do not die so easily," Gandalf murmured, his voice soft yet heavy with sorrow. "What we sought to bury may yet find breath again. Some shadows have roots deeper than we dare know." As the group made their way back into the night, the moonlight casting long, eerie shadows across the land, the distant rumble of the earth could still be felt beneath their feet. The legacy of Gothmog, the Balrog of Gondolin, was far from over. The land felt wrong now, colder, as if it were holding its breath for something yet to come. The winds whispered, and the earth groaned, but the group did not speak. Their eyes were filled with understanding. The shadow was still there, waiting, smoldering in the deep places of the world. And so, Gandalf barely a breath on the wind. The tragedy of Gothmog was never truly ended. It merely waits, smoldering, in the dark places of the world.